They acquired me the way a college acquires a cadaver, except the paperwork insisted I was still using it. I want that on the record first, because everything that came after grew out of that single misunderstanding, and the misunderstanding was never mine. I was a field medic. I had spent 19 years setting bones in places that did not have names and closing wounds in light that did not deserve to be called light, and I knew exactly what I was when the freighters from the Osmuth diagnostic halls came down the line offering compensation for what they called a donor placement, a teaching subject, a living body off the catalog for the medical college to study. The recruiter who signed me used a word in his own tongue that the contract translator rendered as endowment. I learned later it was closer to remains. They were already talking about me in the past tense. The Surrey are tall and thin, and the color of milk held up to a window. Under their skin you can see the slow, pale machinery of them working, and when they are afraid or in pain that machinery lights, a soft blue rising through the chest and throat like ink dropped in water. I would come to read those lights better than they could read each other. But on the day they took me up to the reading floor I knew none of it. I knew only that the corridors smelled of clean nothing, that the lights never threw a shadow, and that every Surrey who passed me slowed and turned their long head to follow me as I went, the way you would watch a fire someone had carried indoors. The reading floor was a theater. I have to call it that because there is no better word. Tiered seating in a steep ring, white and seamless, descending to a flat-lit center where a single low table waited. Above the table hung the lattice, a tangle of fine silver arms folded against the ceiling like a sleeping insect, every joint tipped with an instrument I did not yet have names for. 200 cadets in pale gray filled the tiers. They did not whisper. The Surrey do not whisper. They went still and they went bright, 200 chests glowing faint blue at once, and the sound they made was a low layered hum that I felt in my back teeth before I understood it was a sound at all. A figure came down to the floor to meet me. Older than the cadets, his skin gone the gray of dishwater with age, his lights so dim they barely moved. He wore a long, unmarked coat and he carried himself the way senior surgeons carry themselves everywhere in the galaxy, as if the room were a tool he had already finished using. The translator at my collar gave me his title before it gave me his name. Overreader. Then the name. Tessoth. "You will not be harmed beyond instruction," Tessoth said. His voice through the translator was flat and careful, a man reading a label aloud. "You understand the nature of the placement." "I understand you bought a body," I said. "I'm telling you it's occupied." The lattice arms shifted overhead. He had not touched anything that I saw. The instruments unfolded and came down around the table, and one of them turned toward me, and I felt the first cold breath of the thing they had brought me up there to do. "We study how bodies end," Tessoth said. "Every catalog we hold begins with a creature in distress and follows it down to its conclusion, and from the shape of that fall we learn where to put our hands. We have charts for 40,000 species. We have never had a human." He tilted his head, and the blue rose a finger's width in his throat, and I understood that for him this was excitement, the way an old hunger looks on an old face. "We wish to know how you fall." I have thought a great deal since about how to explain what was wrong with that sentence. The Surrey are not cruel. I need to say that plainly because the easy story is that they tortured me and I survived out of spite, and that is not what happened, and it would dishonor the ones who died believing otherwise. The Surrey are not cruel. They simply do not have the thing inside them that I had, and they had built a civilization and a science and a college full of decent, frightened students on the absence of it. Here is the absence. On their homeworld, long before any of them could read a chart, something selected hard for a single reflex. When a Surrey body crosses a certain threshold of pain, and it is a low threshold, lower than a broken finger, lower than a deep cut, the whole nervous system performs an act they call the stilling. It puts itself out. Not a faint, not shock. A clean, total, instantaneous shutdown, consciousness gone like a switch thrown, the body dropping limp and the lights snuffing to black. They believe it began as mercy. On a world where the predators were patient, a creature that stayed awake through its own unmaking only suffered longer. So evolution taught them to leave. The moment it begins to truly hurt, a Surrey is already gone, already somewhere none of us can follow, and the body that remains is just a body falling along a curve. That is what their medicine reads, the fall curve, the rate and pattern and order in which a stilled body shuts down its systems. A Surrey physician never works on a conscious patient because by the time a patient needs work, the patient has left. They work on the curve. They have spent 1,000 years learning to read, from the way the unconscious machinery winds down, exactly what is wrong and exactly what to do, and they are extraordinary at it. The way a man born without legs can become extraordinary with his hands. They had machines, too. The Mercy lattices, like the silver thing folded above the floor. The Mercy takes a stilled body and reads its curve and intervenes, and it is good, and it is fast, and it is built on one assumption that has never once failed them in their entire recorded history. It assumes the patient is unconscious. They wanted to chart how I fall. They lowered the lattice and they began. I will not walk you through the whole of that first session. Some of it I have put down somewhere I do not look at. The instruments did what instruments do. They induced controlled distress pressure, then heat, then cold, then a kind of deep ache they could meter to the 1,000th, climbing a scale they had used on 40,000 species, and watching for the moment the subject left. They expected me to be gone by the 3rd increment. The catalog said all comparable mass and warmth creatures stilled by the 3rd. They were already turned to their reading instruments, the cadets leaning forward with their styluses, waiting to record the shape of my departure. I did not leave. I am not going to pretend it did not hurt. It hurt the way the work has always hurt, the way a bad night in a bad place hurts, and I did what I had always done, which is the only thing any of us ever really learn out there, which is to stay. To keep my eyes open and my breath long and my hands counted. I named the instruments to myself to have something to hold. I counted the cadets in the 3rd tier. I watched the overreader's lights, and I learned to read them right there in the chair, because pain narrows you down to whatever is in front of you, and what was in front of me was his face. When they reached the increment that should have ended me, and I was still looking at him, the hum in the room broke. 200 styluses stopped. Tessoth came down off his platform and crossed the floor and stood over me, and the blue in his throat was doing something I would only later have a word for, a fast, confused flicker, the light of a man whose instrument has returned a number that is not on the dial. "You are awake," he said. "I'm working," I said. "There's a difference, you'll learn it." He raised the scale. He did it carefully, I will give him that, with the caution of a man stepping out onto ice, watching me the whole way. And I stayed, and somewhere past the place where his entire science said there was nothing left to measure because nothing alive remained to measure it, the lattice gave a soft chime and folded its arms back up to the ceiling on its own. I asked later what the chime meant. It meant the instrument had concluded the subject was non-responsive, that the curve had gone flat, that the body on the table had finished falling, and there was nothing more to read. The lattice had decided I was dead. I was looking right at it. That was the word that went around the college by the next cycle in their tongue, and the translators never did agree on it. Unscorable. The human reads as unscorable. Some of the cadets used it like a slur, and some used it like a prayer, and Tessoth, I think, used it like a wound. Because here is the thing about a science built entirely on the fall. If the subject does not fall, you have not found a hard patient. You have found a hole in the floor of everything you know. They kept me, of course. You do not return an endowment because it confuses you. They moved me to a station at the edge of the reading floor, a transparent cell with a cot and a basin and a wall I could see the theater through, and they resumed the curriculum, and I became furniture. The trials continued. Not every day, they were not monsters, but on a schedule, and each time they tried a new approach to coax a curve out of me, and each time the lattice chimed its little death chime over a woman sitting up and watching it work. The cadets stopped recording. There was nothing to record. I was a question the instruments could not hold, and after a while the college did what colleges do with a question they cannot hold. It went quiet and went on with the syllabus, and left the question sitting at the edge of the room, which gave me a great deal of time to watch the syllabus. The cadets learned on the floor with volunteers they called yieldings. A yielding was a Surrey who agreed, for honor or for pay, or for the strange devotions they kept that I never fully understood, to undergo a measured injury so that students could read the fall. They were not killed. The point was never to kill them. A yielding would take a controlled wound under the lattice, a clean break, a metered burn, a dose of something that wound a particular system down in a particular way, and the body would still in the first instant, and then the cadets would gather at the rail and read the curve as it dropped, and an instructor would walk them through it. Where is the failure? What is the order of it? Where do you put your hands? Then the mercy lattice would intervene, reverse the wound, and bring the yielding back, and the yielding would wake hours later in a recovery cloister having felt and remembered nothing, because they had left before the first true pain and returned after the last. It is a humane system. I want to keep saying that because what I am about to tell you makes it sound otherwise, and it is not otherwise. It is a humane system with one blind spot, and I lived inside the blind spot, and so I was the only one in the building who could see it. The blind spot was this. Their entire medicine assumed the patient was gone, so their entire medicine had no concept, none, not a word for it, not a procedure, not a single page in 40,000 species of charts, of a patient who was present. A Surrey physician had never once in the history of the kind talked a patient through anything, had never held a hand that was gripping back, had never made a decision with a frightened conscious creature looking up and asking what was happening. The mercy lattice triaged purely by the curve, by the cold arithmetic of the fall, and if a body did not fall in a way the lattice recognized, if the curve went strange, or flat, or off the catalog, the lattice classified it as already concluded and turned its arms away to spend its attention on bodies it could still read. It was not callous. It was a tool doing exactly what it had been built to do by people who had never imagined the case it could not handle. I imagined it constantly. From my cell at the edge of the floor, I watched cadet after cadet learn to read the dead, and I thought, none of you would last 10 seconds in a room where the patient was screaming. And I was right, and being right kept me sane for a while. And then one day it stopped being an idle bitterness and became my whole life, because of a cadet named Erie. I should not have known her name. I knew very few of them. The Surrey have a way of not introducing themselves to furniture, but Erie was a yielding as well as a student. She earned her tuition the hard way, lying on the table for the others to read, and she came to the floor more than most, and she was clumsy and young, and her lights ran high and bright with a nervousness the older cadets had learned to bank down. She fascinated me because she was afraid, and they so rarely let me see them afraid. She would lie down on the table for her own classmates to injure her, and her chest would glow like a held breath right up until the instant the wound landed and the stilling took her, and then she would go dark and limp, and the others would read her and bring her back, and she would wake in the cloister knowing nothing, and the next cycle she would come and do it again. I do not know what she was paying off. I never asked, because by the time I could have asked, asking would have hurt too much. The day it changed, Erie was on the table and a cadet I did not know was running the injury. A metered dose, something that was supposed to wind down a single organ system slowly so the class could read a long, clean curve. But the cadet misjudged the dose, the placement. I'm not even sure the cadet knew which, and Erie's chest lit up wrong. I had been watching that blue machinery for 9 months by then with nothing else to do, and I knew wrong when I saw it. The light did not rise the way fear rose. It spiked and forked and ran in 2 directions at once, and then it began to do something I had never seen any Surrey light do, which was flicker out unevenly, in patches, like a city losing power grid by grid. She did not still cleanly. That was the horror of it, and not one of them on the floor understood what they were looking at, because they had never seen anything but a clean still. Erie's body was failing faster than the stilling could take her, and so for a few seconds, 3, 4, I have counted them since more times than I will admit. Eerie was awake inside a body that was coming apart. Her long fingers closed on the edge of the table. Her head turned. And her eyes, those huge pale Surrey eyes, found the only face on the whole floor that was looking back at her with recognition instead of measurement, which was mine, through the wall of my cell. I have been looked at like that before. Out there in the work, you get looked at like that and you learn what it costs you to look back. And you learn to look back anyway because the alternative is to let them go alone. I put my hand flat on the glass. I do not know what I thought it would do. And then the stilling finally caught her and she went dark and limp, and the room exhaled its low hum and the cadets bent to their reading. And I stood there with my hand on the glass and watched the Mercy lattice come down over her. And the Mercy lattice read her forked, patchy, off-catalog curve, and it chimed. The death chime. My chime. It had decided Erie's fall was anomalous, unscorable, already concluded, and it folded its arms back up to the ceiling to save its attention for cases it could read. It was leaving her. I have run a great many emergencies. I have never in my life moved the way I moved then, and I had nowhere to move to because I was behind a wall. I hit the release panel I had watched the orderlies use for 9 months, and it would not answer me. I shouted. The translator at my collar threw my words into their tongue, and across the floor, a few heads turned to the furniture making noise. An instructor came toward my cell with the unhurried walk of a man coming to quiet a malfunctioning fixture. The yielding, I said. Her curves anomalous, the lattice has abandoned her. She is dying for real, do you understand me? She is not stilled, she is dying. The lattice has concluded the reading, the instructor said. The translator made his voice very calm. The subject's fall is unscorable. There is nothing to be done with an unscorable. There is everything to be done, I said. Open this door. He did not open the door. He turned to go back to his class, and the only reason any of this story has the ending it has instead of the one it was going to have is that the overreader was on the floor that cycle, up on his platform, and the overreader had spent 9 months unable to stop watching me. Tessoth had heard the word unscorable come out of my cell. The same word the lattice had used over my own body, over and over, the chime he could not explain. And something in that old gray surgeon, something older than his science and decent under all that confusion, made him do the one thing no one else on the floor would have done. He looked at the dying cadet, and he looked at the impossible woman who had never once fallen, and he made a decision with no chart to support it. He opened my door. I do not remember crossing the floor. I remember the table. I remember that the Mercy lattice was folded and gone, and that Erie's body was wrong in every way I knew how to read. Her breathing arrested, the blue gone out of her except for one stubborn flicker low in her chest. And I remember that 200 Surrey cadets had gone silent and dark in the tears, because the furniture was on the floor with its hands on a yielding, and not one of them had a single procedure for what they were seeing. I did the work. That is all it was. There was no miracle in it, and I want no one to imagine there was. I had no instruments and I did not need theirs, because theirs were built to read a fall and I was not there to read anything. I was there to keep a body running until the body could run itself. I cleared her airway with my fingers. I found the place on a Surrey chest where you can drive a rhythm into the heart machinery from outside. I had spent 9 months watching that machinery work. I knew where it lived, and I put the heel of my hand there and I pushed, and I counted. The old count, the count I have driven into more chests than I will ever know the names of, and between the pushes I did the thing none of them had a word for. I talked to her. Stay, I said, you stay with me, I know it hurts, it's allowed to hurt, you stay anyway. I do not know if the translator carried it or if it carried anything, and it did not matter because the words were never the point. The point was the voice. The point was that, for the first time in the recorded history of her entire species, a Surrey who had not quite managed to leave her own dying body found, instead of the dark, a hand pushing rhythm into her chest, and a voice that had decided not to let her go alone. The point was presence. I gave her the one thing their whole humane civilization had never once been able to give, because they were always, mercifully, already gone. Her chest lit, not the forked wrong light. Arise. The blue came up under my hands in a long climbing wave, and her breathing caught and stumbled and took, and her eyes opened, and they found me again, and this time there was a person behind them, and the person was furious and terrified and alive. The floor made a sound I had never heard them make. 200 chests lit at once, but not in fear. I did not have a name for it then. I have one now. It was the sound a room full of physicians makes when they watch someone do the thing they have spent their whole lives believing could not be done. It took the mercy lattice 4 full minutes to come back down, because somebody up in the tiers had had to override it, had had to physically tell the machine that the unscorable case it had abandoned was a live patient under treatment, and the machine had argued in its dumb mechanical way that this was impossible. By the time it descended and took over and began the long, careful work of repairing what the bad dose had done, Erie was stable under my hands and conscious, and gripping my wrist hard enough to leave marks, and I let her, because there is a kind of grip you do not pry loose. You just stay inside it until it loosens on its own. They moved her to the cloister. She lived. I want that down plainly too before anything else. She lived, and she is the last I knew teaching. Tessoth came to my cell that night. He came alone, which he never did, and he stood outside the glass for a long time before he spoke, his old lights moving slow. The lattice abandoned her, he said finally. By every reading we hold, she was concluded. Unscorable, the same as you. He turned his long head. You did not read her fall, you did something we have no word for. I kept her here, I said. That's all. You people are so good at reading how a body leaves that you never learn to make one stay. Where I come from, leaving's the part we fight. You stay, he said slowly, as if turning the words over to see what was written on the underside of them. Through the pain, you do not leave. None of us can do this. It is not courage what you have. It is the translator hunted for a word and gave up and offered me the raw one, and I have kept it. It is a thing the body simply will not do. He meant the stilling. He meant that a Surrey could no more choose to stay awake through agony than I could choose to stop my own heart by deciding to. Their mercy was hardwired. They left because they could not do otherwise, and so they had built 1,000 years of medicine for the bodies the absent left behind, and never once met a creature stubborn enough, or unlucky enough, to be present for its own undoing. It's not a virtue, I told him. I wanted him to have that because it was true and because he was an honest man, and honest men deserve the true thing. Staying awake through it isn't brave, it's just what we are. We can't leave, so we learn to be useful while we're here. That's all your charts are missing. They were written by people who were always already gone. He was quiet a long while. Your placement file, he said at last, lists your status as donor subject, specimen, unscorable. The blue moved in his throat, dim and even. I am not able to change it. The college acquired remains. The contract is a contract. The record will say what the record says. I know what the record says, I told him. I've known since the freighter. Then know also, Tessoth said, and he did the thing the Surrey almost never do. He held my eyes through the glass with his own and let his light stay open while he did it. That tomorrow, when the cadets gather on the floor, the door of this station will not be locked, and the floor will not be a place where they learn to read the dead. It will be a place where they learn, from the only one of us who can teach it, how to keep the living here. He paused. The record will not say that either. The record is for the dead. You are teaching us the other thing. There is no form for it. There has never needed to be one. He left. I did not sleep, but then I rarely do. In the morning, the door was not locked. I want to tell you the college rewrote my classification, gave me a title, struck the word specimen and carved teacher into the wall in their seamless white, but they did not, because that is not how institutions concede what they cannot admit. The file still says what it said. Somewhere in the great cold archive of the Osmuth Diagnostic Halls, there is a line that lists me as remains, unscorable, a body acquired to chart a fall that never came, and that line has never been corrected, and I expect it never will be. The record is for the dead. They are good at the dead. But every cycle now the cadets gather, and the lattice stays folded against the ceiling, and they come down off the tiers to the flat lit center of the floor where I am waiting, and I show them the thing their whole science was built around the absence of. I show them what a present patient looks like. I teach them the rhythm and the count, and where the heart machinery lives under a Surrey chest, and I teach them the harder thing, the thing that has no instrument and no chart, which is how to put your voice into a frightened conscious creature and tell it to stay, and to mean it, and to not look away while it decides. They are slow learners because they have never had to do it, because their own mercy carried them off every time it mattered and left the staying to a species that never got the mercy and learned to make a virtue of the lack. But they learn. Erie teaches the first cycle students now, and she does the voice better than any of them, because she is the only Surrey alive who remembers being present for it, who remembers a hand on the glass and a hand on her chest, and a voice that would not let her go into the dark alone. The overeater still comes to the floor. He is older now, his light's gone almost to nothing, and one day soon his body is going to begin a fall of its own, and the stilling is going to do for him what it has done for every one of his kind since before the charts, which is to carry him gently off before the worst of it. I have told him I will be there. I have told him that when it comes, his body will leave the way all his bodies leave, but that this time there will be someone present in the room who does not, someone awake, someone staying, a hand he can grip on the way out even if he will not be there to feel it. He said that was a strange comfort, to be promised company he could not experience. I told him it was not for him to experience. I told him it was for me. That is the part their charts will never hold, and the part I have stopped trying to make them hold. They acquired a human to chart how a body dies. They are very good at how a body dies. They have 40,000 species of it, written down in a cold, clean hand, every fall mapped, every curve read, the whole patient library of departure. Mine was the one that never filed the report. I was supposed to fall and be read and become a line in the catalog of leaving, and instead I sat up in the chair and looked at the instrument that had declared me concluded, and I have been on my feet ever since, doing the only thing my kind was ever really built for. We cannot leave, so we stay. And while we are staying, we keep our hands on whatever is trying to go, and we count, and we do not look away. That is the whole report. It does not fit on their form. It was never going to.